The creature limped through the twisted metal remains of what had once been a proud battle station. Each step sent waves of pain through its crystalline bones, the once brilliant blue glow within them now barely a flicker. Zephyros had been magnificent once, a Vorthak war mount bred for the elite cavalry of the hegemony. Standing 12 feet at the shoulder with 6 powerful legs and armor-like scales that shimmered between deep purple and silver, he had been the pride of Commander Thektar's personal guard. But that was before the humans arrived. The memory burned in his mind like acid. The day when everything changed. The hegemony had been expanding across the galaxy for 3 millennia, crushing every species they encountered. Their war mounts were legendary, feared across 100 systems. Each Vorthak was bonded to their mount from hatching, creating a telepathic link that made them unstoppable in battle. Humans had seemed like another easy conquest. Small, soft creatures with primitive weapons and no natural armor. The hegemony scouts had reported them as barely past the nuclear age, still fighting among themselves on their tiny blue world. It should have been a simple harvesting operation. Zephyros remembered the pride in his rider's mental voice as they descended from orbit with 10,000 other mountain rider pairs. The humans had detected them coming and managed to evacuate most of their population centers, but that only meant longer hunts. More sport. The first human settlement they attacked fought back with crude projectile weapons that barely scratched Vorthak armor. Zephyros had trampled through their barricades like they were made of paper, his hooves crushing their vehicles while Thektar rained plasma fire from his back. It was supposed to be glorious. Then, the humans adapted. It started small. A new type of ammunition that could penetrate their scales. Energy shields that absorbed plasma fire. Vehicles that moved in ways that defied the tactical manuals. But the real shock came when the humans began targeting the bonds. Somehow, impossibly, they had learned to disrupt the telepathic connection between mount and rider. Zephyros still remembered the moment when Thektar's presence vanished from his mind like a candle being snuffed out. The sudden emptiness, the crushing loneliness, the way his purpose simply evaporated. One moment, he was part of something greater than himself. The next, he was just an animal lost in a war he no longer understood. Without the bond, Vorthak mounts became confused, directionless. Many simply stopped fighting altogether. Others, driven mad by the severing, turned on their own forces. The perfect unity that had made them unbeatable became their greatest weakness. Zephyros had fled. He was ashamed of it now, but in that moment of disconnection, pure animal instinct had taken over. He had run from the battlefield, abandoning everything he had ever been trained to protect. Behind him, the sounds of his people's defeat echoed across the human city. That was 6 months ago. Since then, he had been wandering the outer rim of human space, hiding in asteroid fields and abandoned stations. Most of the hegemony forces had retreated to regroup, but stragglers like him were hunted by both sides. The humans saw him as an enemy combatant. His own people saw him as a deserter, if they bothered to see him at all. The station where he now sheltered had been a mining operation before the war. The humans had evacuated it when the first hegemony fleets appeared, leaving behind only empty corridors and the occasional piece of equipment. Zephyros had been hiding here for 2 weeks, surviving on the emergency rations he had found in the crew quarters. They were not meant for his physiology, and he could feel his strength ebbing with each passing day. His scales had lost their shimmer, fading to a dull gray-brown. The bioluminescent crystals along his spine that had once pulsed with vital energy now barely glowed at all. Worst of all, the wound on his left rear leg where a human plasma cutter had caught him was infected. The medical systems on his armor had failed days ago, and he had no idea how to treat it with human equipment. He was dying slowly but surely. Part of him welcomed it. What was the point of living without purpose, without the bond that had defined his entire existence? He was no longer a war mount of the hegemony. He was not even sure what he was anymore. Zephyros made his way to what had been the station's observation deck. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, he could see the stars. Somewhere out, there was Vorthak Prime, the homeworld he would never see again. Somewhere else were the human worlds, full of the strange creatures that had somehow accomplished what no one in 3,000 years of galactic conquest had managed to do. He settled down on the deck, his massive form barely fitting in the space designed for much smaller beings. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through his injured leg, but he ignored it. Pain was better than the numbness that had consumed him since losing Thektar. As he lay there, Zephyros noticed something unusual. A small transport ship was approaching the station. It was clearly human in design, sleek and angular where hegemony ships were curved and organic. But it was moving slowly, almost cautiously. If it were a military vessel, it would have already launched an attack. If it were a salvage operation, it would be accompanied by larger ships. The ship docked at the main airlock, and Zephyros could hear the distant sound of the seals engaging. Someone was coming aboard. He should run, he knew. Every instinct told him to flee before he was discovered. But he was too tired, too weak, and too defeated to care anymore. Let them find him. Let them end this prolonged suffering. He could hear footsteps in the corridors below, careful and measured. Not the heavy boots of soldiers, but something lighter. Voices echoed through the station's empty halls, too distant for him to make out words, but clearly human in their cadence and tone. Zephyros closed his eyes and waited for whatever fate was about to find him. After months of running, months of hiding, months of existing without purpose, he was finally ready for it to be over. The irony was not lost on him that his end would come at the hands of the very creatures his people had underestimated so catastrophically. The footsteps grew closer, climbing through the station's levels. Soon they would reach the observation deck. Soon his war would finally end, not with glory or honor, but with simple exhaustion. It was perhaps a fitting end for a creature who had abandoned everything he had sworn to protect. But as he lay there in the dim starlight, something stirred in the depths of his mind. A flicker of something he had not felt since the bond was severed. It was faint, almost undetectable, but it was there. A presence, gentle and curious, touching the edges of his consciousness like a cautious whisper. Zephyros's eyes snapped open. That was impossible. The hegemony's invasion had scattered humanity across the galaxy, leaving millions displaced and searching for new homes. In the chaos, it was easy to disappear, to become just another face in the crowded refugee centers. But Maya's difference went deeper than her telepathic abilities. While most humans experienced the Vorthak as terrifying alien monsters, Maya had always sensed something else. During the few encounters she had witnessed, she had felt the deep bonds between the alien riders and their mounts. She had perceived the love, the loyalty, the absolute trust that connected them. When a human scientist developed the bond disruption technology, Maya had been horrified. She had felt the screams of the severed mounts across the battlefield, waves of anguish that had left her sobbing in her shelter while everyone around her celebrated their great victory. Her adoptive father, Dr. James Chun, was one of the lead researchers on the human war effort. He had found Maya as a child on New Singapore after the hegemony attack, one of thousands of orphans left behind when the evacuation ships departed. James was a xenobiologist, fascinated by alien life forms, and he had adopted Maya partly out of loneliness and partly because he recognized something special in the quiet girl who seemed to understand creatures that others feared. For years, Maya had helped her father in his research, using her abilities to provide insights into alien psychology and behavior. She had been careful never to reveal the full extent of her powers, but James suspected there was more to his daughter than she let on. He never pushed, though. He understood that everyone had secrets, especially in wartime. When the war ended with humanity's unexpected victory, Maya thought her nightmares would stop. But they only got worse. She could still feel them out there, the broken Vorthak mounts wandering lost and alone through space. Their pain called to her across impossible distances, a constant ache in the back of her mind. She had begged her father to help her find them, to do something to ease their suffering, but he had explained that it was impossible. The military classified all alien creatures as potential threats. Any attempt to help them would be seen as treason. So Maya had waited and planned and prepared. She learned everything she could about Vorthack biology and psychology from her father's research files. She studied their language, their customs, their technology. She learned to pilot a ship, claiming it was for her 18th birthday. And when she finally felt ready, she had taken one of the small research vessels and slipped away from the colony world where they lived. She had been searching for 3 months now, following the faint psychic traces that her abilities allowed her to detect. Most of the signatures she had found led to nothing but debris fields where desperate Vorthack had met their end. But this one was different. This one was alive, hurt, and so deeply sad that it made her heart ache. The mining station had been easy to track down once she had narrowed the search area. It was the perfect hiding place for a creature that wanted to avoid both human and hegemony patrols. Remote, abandoned, with enough supplies to last for a while. As she docked her ship, Maya could feel the presence growing stronger. The alien mind was vast and complex, nothing like the simple animal intelligence she had expected. She made her way through the station carefully, not wanting to startle whatever was hiding here. The psychic signature was coming from the upper levels, probably the observation deck. As she climbed, Maya tried to project feelings of calm and peace, hoping to communicate her peaceful intentions. The emotion she received in return nearly knocked her to her knees. Pain, yes, but also shame, loneliness, and a grief so profound it threatened to overwhelm her own mind. This creature had lost everything it cared about, everyone it had ever loved. It was waiting here to die, seeing no point in continuing to exist. Maya paused outside the observation deck, her hand on the door controls. Through the metal, she could sense the alien presence more clearly now. It was aware of her, had been aware since she docked. It was not afraid, though. It was too broken for fear, too defeated to care what happened next. Taking a deep breath, Maya opened the door and stepped inside. The creature before her was magnificent even in its obvious distress. 12 feet tall at the shoulder, built like a fusion of horse, dragon, and living crystal. Its scales should have been beautiful, she knew, but they were dull and lifeless now. The crystals along its spine barely glowed, and she could see dried blood around a wound on its rear leg. But it was the eyes that truly broke her heart. They were large and intelligent, swirled with colors she had no names for, and filled with such despair that she had to fight back tears. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Maya had imagined this meeting countless times, but now that it was happening, she found herself at a loss for words. How do you greet a creature whose people you had been at war with? How do you explain that you want to help when your own species have been the cause of its suffering? Instead of speaking aloud, Maya reached out with her mind, gently touching the edges of the alien consciousness. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The creature's head snapped up, its eyes wide with shock, and something that might have been hope. Impossible, came the thought, carried on waves of disbelief. The mental voice was deep and resonant, colored with harmonics that her human mind could barely process. Humans cannot bond. The tests proved it. You cannot hear me. I can hear you, Maya replied, her mental voice much smaller and simpler compared to his. I have always been able to hear. What is your name? The alien mind reeled with confusion and wonder. For several minutes, there was nothing but chaos in the psychic link as the creature tried to process what was happening. Then, slowly, carefully like someone learning to walk after a terrible injury, the mental voice returned. I was Zephyros, Mount of the 3rd Cavalry, bonded to Commander Thektar of the Hegemony 1st Fleet. Each word carried weight and pain. But that was before. Now I am nothing, a broken thing without purpose or place. You are not nothing, Maya said firmly, stepping closer despite the creature's massive size. You are Zephyros, and you're magnificent. I've been searching for you for months. Searching? Why would a human search for me? Your people have one. You should be celebrating your victory, not seeking out the remnants of your enemies. Maya moved slowly around the enormous alien, studying his injuries and condition. The wound on his leg was definitely infected, and she could see other signs of malnutrition and neglect. But it was his mental state that worried her most. The despair was so deep, so all-consuming, that she wondered how he had survived this long. Because what my people did to you is wrong, she said both aloud and telepathically, breaking your bonds, leaving you lost and alone. You didn't deserve that. None of your people did. We came to conquer you, Zephyros replied, his mental voice heavy with shame, to destroy your civilization and add your worlds to the hegemony. How can you say we did not deserve whatever fate befell us? Maya considered this as she pulled medical supplies from her pack. Because you were following orders, fighting for what you believed was right. Because you formed bonds of love and trust with your riders. Because when that bond was severed, you felt pain that no living being should have to endure. She began working on his infected wound, her movements gentle but confident, and because you chose to run rather than continue fighting. That tells me something about who you really are inside. The alien mind was quiet for a long time as Maya worked. Her father had taught her basic veterinary medicine as part of her xenobiology education, and while Vorthack physiology was different from any Earth creature, the basics were similar enough. She cleaned the wound, applied antibiotic gel, and wrapped it carefully with surgical tape. Why can you bond when others cannot? Zephyros finally asked. The hegemony's best scientists tested hundreds of human prisoners. None showed any telepathic ability whatsoever. I don't know, Maya admitted. I was born different. Maybe it's a mutation, maybe it's evolution, maybe it's just luck. But I've always been able to sense thoughts and emotions, especially from non-human minds. During the war, I could feel your people's pain when the bond was severed. It was one of the worst things I've ever experienced. You felt our pain? The mental voice was filled with wonder and disbelief. But that would mean you suffered because of our suffering? Yes. Maya moved to examine the dimming crystals along his spine. And I felt your loneliness afterward. All of you scattered and lost. That's why I had to find you. I couldn't let you die alone and forgotten. She could feel something changing in the alien mind, walls that had been built from months of despair beginning to crack. Hope was a dangerous thing for someone who had given up on life, but Maya could sense it growing despite Zephyros' attempts to suppress it. I have failed my rider, my people, my purpose, he said, but the mental voice lacked the absolute certainty it had held before. I'm a deserter and a coward. What use could I possibly be to anyone? Maya finished her examination and sat down in front of his massive head, looking directly into those swirling alien eyes. You're not a coward. You're a survivor. And maybe, just maybe, you can help me save the others like you. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that neither dared to cross. Maya watched as Zephyros processed what she had said, his massive head tilting as emotions flickered across his alien features. Through their growing mental connection, she could feel his disbelief warring with a desperate hope he was afraid to acknowledge. Others like me, he finally asked, his mental voice barely a whisper. You know of others who survived? At least a dozen that I can sense clearly, Maya replied, settling more comfortably on the deck. Maybe more that are too far away or too deeply hidden. They're scattered across this sector of space, hiding in asteroid fields, derelict stations, abandoned planets. All of them alone, all of them lost. The great alien's head dropped to the deck with a thud that shook the entire observation platform. For a moment, Maya thought she had overwhelmed him with too much information too quickly. But then she felt it through their connection. Not despair this time, but a complicated mix of grief, guilt, and the first stirring of something that might become purpose. I remember Kithara, Zephyros said slowly, his mental voice filled with pain. She was bonded to Lieutenant Velron, my riding partner in the 3rd Cavalry. When the bonds were severed, She threw her rider to safety before the humans could kill him. I saw her last on the battlefield, standing over his unconscious form and roaring challenges at the human forces. I thought she died there. She lived, Maya confirmed. I can feel her presence sometimes, usually when I'm deep in meditation. She's hiding in the Kepler Nebula on one of the outer gas giant moons. But her signal is weak, fading. I think she's dying slowly. Zephyros's entire body trembled, the crystals along his spine flickering with the first genuine light they had shown since Maya arrived. Kithra was always the strongest of us. If she is dying, then the others are dying too, Maya finished gently. That's why I need your help. I can sense them, but I can't reach them all alone. And even if I could, I don't know enough about your people to really help them. I need someone who understands what they're going through, someone who can speak to them as an equal. The alien was quiet for a long time, his vast mind wrestling with concepts that challenged everything he thought he knew about himself and his place in the universe. Maya waited patiently, occasionally sending waves of calm and encouragement through their connection. She could feel him examining their bond, testing its strength and nature with the expertise of someone who had lived his entire life connected to another consciousness. This connection between us, he said eventually, it is not like the bond one shared with Thektar. That was forged in childhood, shaped by years of training and mutual dependence. This is different, softer in some ways, but also deeper. How is it possible? Maya considered how to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. I think it's because I'm not trying to control you or use you for anything. When I touch your mind, I'm not looking for a tool or a weapon. I'm just reaching out to another thinking, feeling being. Maybe that's the difference. Your people's bond disruption technology, Zephyros said, his mental voice sharpening with sudden understanding. It worked because our bonds were hierarchical. The rider was always dominant, the mount always subordinate. Your scientists found a way to target that specific neural pathway. But what you and I have is equal, Maya finished. Neither of us is in charge. We're just connected. She felt Zephyros testing the bond again, this time more deliberately. Instead of the careful probing she had sensed before, this was an act of exploration. He shared with her a memory from his youth, the first time he had felt Thektar's presence in his mind, the overwhelming joy of knowing he was no longer alone in the universe. The memory was tinged with loss now, but also with a growing recognition that what he had thought was forever gone might actually be possible again, just in a different form. If we can bond, he said slowly, if what we have can grow stronger, then perhaps the others could bond as well. Perhaps they could find purpose again. That's what I'm hoping, Maya said. But first, we need to help them survive. And that means convincing them that life is worth living. Zephyros raised his massive head, and for the first time since Maya had entered the observation deck, she saw something other than despair in his swirling eyes. It was determination, faint but growing stronger by the moment. Kithra, he said, if anyone can be saved, it is her. But the Kepler Nebula is dangerous territory. Human patrols, hegemony scout ships, pirates. And my condition, he gestured with one of his foreclaw toward his injured leg and dimmed crystals. We'll fix your condition first, Maya said firmly. I've got medical supplies on my ship, and my father taught me a lot about alien physiology. As for the patrols and pirates, well, we'll have to be clever about avoiding them. Over the next several hours, Maya worked to treat Zephyros's various ailments while they planned her rescue mission. The infected wound required surgery to remove the damaged tissue, which Maya performed while Zephyros used their mental connection to guide her through the procedure. It was strange and intimate, feeling his pain as if it were her own while simultaneously drawing on his knowledge of Vortak anatomy. The malnutrition was harder to address with the limited supplies on her ship, but Maya had brought several cases of high-energy supplements that her father had designed for feeding alien specimens. They weren't perfect for Vortak physiology, but they were better than the human rations Zephyros had been surviving on. Most importantly, she began working to restore the energy flow to his bioluminescent crystals. This required a delicate manipulation of his nervous system, something that would have been impossible without their telepathic link. Maya had to learn to see through his senses, to feel the energy patterns that powered his natural abilities, and to help guide that power back to its proper channels. As the crystals began to glow more brightly, Zephyros's entire demeanor changed. The light wasn't just decorative. It was a visible manifestation of his life force, his connection to the quantum fields that powered Vorthack technology. With each restored crystal, he became more alert, more present, more himself. "I had forgotten," he said wonderingly, as blue-white light pulsed along his spine in complex patterns. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be whole." "You're not whole yet," Maya said, exhaustion creeping into her voice after hours of intense telepathic work. "But you're getting there." As night fell across the mining station, Maya made camp in the observation deck rather than returning to her ship. She wanted to stay close to Zephyros, partly to monitor his recovery, but mostly because their connection was still fragile and new. Distance might weaken it before it had a chance to fully establish. She curled up in her sleeping bag near his massive form, feeling oddly safe despite being in the presence of a creature that could crush her without effort. Through their bond, she could sense his protective instincts, his growing affection for the strange little human who had chosen to help him rather than hurt him. "Maya," his mental voice was soft in the darkness, barely disturbing her drift towards sleep. "Why did you really come looking for me? Not just to help the others. There is something more, something you have not shared." Maya was quiet for a moment, considering whether she was ready to reveal her deepest truth. But their bond was built on honesty and trust. If it was going to survive what they were about to attempt, there could be no secrets between them. "I've been alone my entire life," she said finally. "Different, isolated, unable to truly connect with anyone. When I sensed your people during the war, when I felt the bonds you shared with your riders for the first time, I understood what I was missing. What I had never had." She paused, tears threatening to spill over. "And when those bonds were broken, when I felt your anguish echo across space, I knew I had to do something. Not just to help you, but because maybe if I could restore what was lost, I might finally find the connection I've been searching for my entire life." The response came not in words, but in pure emotion. Gratitude, understanding, and something deeper and warmer that Maya had no name for. Zephyros shared with her his own memories of loneliness, the terrible months since losing Thektar, the gradual discovery that what they were building together was different from anything he had known before, but no less meaningful. "Then, we go forward together," he said. "Whatever comes, whatever dangers we face them as bonded partners. You are no longer alone, Maya-chun, and neither am I." As sleep finally claimed her, Maya felt their connection settling into something stable and permanent. Tomorrow they would begin the dangerous journey to find the others. Tomorrow they would test whether what they had built could survive the challenges ahead. But tonight, for the first time in her life, she was not alone. The journey to the Kepler Nebula took 3 days through hyperspace, 3 days during which Maya and Zephyros worked to strengthen their bond and plan for what they might find. Maya's ship was barely large enough to accommodate Zephyros's massive frame, requiring him to remain in a compressed position that clearly caused discomfort. But he endured it without complaint, understanding that this temporary suffering was necessary for a larger purpose. During the long hours of travel, they shared memories and experiences, each learning to see the universe through alien eyes. Maya showed Zephyros her childhood on New Singapore, the terror of the hegemony invasion, and her years of hiding her abilities while helping her adoptive father with his research. In return, Zephyros shared the glory days of the 3rd Cavalry, the deep bonds of brotherhood among the Mount Warriors, and the devastating moment when his world shattered with Thektar's severing. But it was more than just sharing memories. Their bond was evolving, becoming something unprecedented in either of their species' experiences. Maya found that she could access Zephyros's enhanced senses, seeing deeper into the electromagnetic spectrum and feeling the quantum fluctuations that Vorthack naturally detected. Zephyros, meanwhile, began to understand human emotions and motivations in ways that no hegemony scholar had ever achieved. Your people are far more complex than we believed, he admitted as they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler Nebula. The intelligence reports described you as simple, primitive creatures driven by basic survival instincts. But through your mind, I see layers of thought and feeling that rival our own. That was your first mistake, Maya said, checking the scanner readings for patrol ships. Underestimating us. My father says that most conquering species make the same error. They see surface behavior and assume it represents the totality of what we are. The nebula stretched before them like a vast cloud of stars and gas, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The charged particles would provide cover from long-range sensors, but they would also interfere with their own ability to locate Kythera. Maya would have to rely on her telepathic senses, following the faint psychic trail she had detected from hundreds of light years away. As they entered the nebula's outer edges, Zephyros suddenly stiffened, his crystals flaring with alarm. Something is wrong, he said urgently. I can feel her, but she is fading. Maya, we may be too late. Maya pushed her consciousness outward, searching for the familiar presence she had sensed for months. When she found it, her heart nearly stopped. The psychic signature that had once burned bright and proud was now barely a flicker, like a candle flame guttering in a storm wind. How far? She asked, pushing the ship's engines to their maximum safe speed. The fourth moon of the gas giant, in the shadow of the ring system. But, Maya, there are others there. Not Vorthack. The signature is wrong. As they approached the moon, Maya's sensors began picking up artificial structures on the surface. What had once been a mining colony showed signs of recent habitation, though her scans indicated most of the facilities were now abandoned. But not all of them. Pirates, Maya said grimly, recognizing the jury-rigged equipment and weapon emplacements that surrounded a small compound. They must have found her. Through Zephyros, she could sense Kythera's presence more clearly now. The magnificent Vorthack mount was alive, but barely, kept in some kind of containment facility within the pirate base. Her captors were using her as a prize, probably planning to sell her to the highest bidder or use her in illegal fighting rings. We have to help her, Maya said, but even as she spoke, she realized the impossibility of the situation. There were at least 24 pirates in the compound, all heavily armed and experienced fighters. Her ship had no weapons beyond basic defensive systems, and while Zephyros was a formidable warrior, he was still recovering from months of neglect and injury. There's another way, Zephyros said slowly, his mental voice heavy with old pain. But it would require me to do something I swore I would never do again. What do you mean? Instead of answering directly, Zephyros shared a memory from his military training. Young Vorthack mounts were taught to use their natural abilities not just for transportation and combat, but for infiltration and psychological warfare. Their telepathic capabilities, properly focused, could project fear, confusion, and despair into enemy minds. It was a technique that required absolute mental discipline and came with terrible risks. Projecting such negative emotions for extended periods could permanently damage the mount's own psyche, trapping them in the very emotions they wielded as weapons. It is called the silent scream, Zephyros explained, a projection of pure terror that can incapacitate enemies without physical violence. But the cost is high. After using it, some mounts never recovered. They became consumed by the darkness they had projected. Maya felt his fear, not of death or injury, but of losing himself to the technique. There has to be another way, she said. Not with the resources we have. And Kythera cannot wait. I can feel her life ebbing away. If we do not act now, we will lose her. They landed the ship in a crater on the moon's dark side, hidden from the pirate base by several kilometers of rocky terrain. As they made their final preparations, Maya tried to think of alternatives, but every scenario she ran through ended in failure. The pirates were too numerous, too well-equipped, and too entrenched for a direct assault. "If you do this," she said finally, "you won't do it alone. Our bond works both ways. I can help carry the psychological burden, share the darkness so it doesn't consume you." "Maya, no." Zephyrosa's mental voice was sharp with alarm. "Human minds are not designed to handle such psychic pressures. You could be permanently damaged, driven insane, or worse. And you could be lost to the darkness if you try this alone," she countered. "But together, we might both survive it. Together, we can save Kithra and maybe learn something that will help us save the others." Before Zephyros could protest further, Maya was already reaching deeper into their bond, intertwining her consciousness with his in ways they had never attempted before. It was like learning to see with 4 eyes instead of 2, to think with 2 brains working in perfect harmony. The sensation was overwhelming, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. They approached the pirate compound in darkness, using Zephyros's natural stealth abilities and Maya's human intuition to avoid the perimeter guards. As they got closer to the central building where Kithra was being held, Maya could sense her more clearly. The great mount was chained with energy restraints, weakened by starvation and abuse, but still fighting to maintain her dignity even in captivity. "She is magnificent," Zephyros said with deep respect. "Even in this state, she remembers what she was." The compound had perhaps 30 pirates, most of them asleep in their quarters or distracted by gambling and drinking in the main hall. Only 6 guards were actively on duty, and they were focused on external threats rather than anything that might already be inside their perimeter. Zephyros positioned himself in the center of the compound, while Maya found a hiding spot with a clear view of the main building. Through their enhanced bond, they began to gather the psychic energy needed for the silent scream, drawing on reserves of mental power that neither had known they possessed. The technique began slowly, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Zephyros reached into the darkest corners of his memory, to the moments of greatest fear and despair he had ever experienced. The severing of his bond with Thektar, the confusion and terror of finding himself alone on the battlefield, the months of wandering lost and purposeless through space. But instead of projecting these emotions outward immediately, he shared them with Maya, letting her human perspective transform them into something even more potent. Human fears were different from Vorthak fears, shaped by different evolutionary pressures and cultural experiences. Combined with the alien terror, they created a psychological weapon unlike anything either species had developed alone. When they finally released the silent scream, the effect was instantaneous and devastating. Every conscious mind within a half-kilometer radius was suddenly flooded with primal terror, the kind of fear that bypassed rational thought and struck directly at the animal brain. Pirates who had faced death dozens of times found themselves paralyzed with dread, unable to move or think or even scream. Maya felt the darkness trying to claim her, the projected fears attempting to take root in her own consciousness. But the bond with Zephyros created a feedback loop of support, each of them helping the other maintain their sense of self in the storm of manufactured terror they had unleashed. As the pirates collapsed into catatonic states, Maya and Zephyros moved quickly through the compound. They found Kithara in a reinforced containment cell, barely recognizable as the proud warrior Mount Zephyros remembered. Her scales were scarred and dulled, her crystals dark, her eyes hollow with suffering. But when she sensed Zephyros's presence, those eyes flared with sudden hope. "Zephyros, is it truly you, or has despair finally driven me mad?" "It is me, sister in arms," he replied, working to disable the energy restraints with Maya's help. "And I have brought a friend, a human who can bond as we once did." Kithara's massive head turned to study Maya with ancient, intelligent eyes. "A human? But that is impossible. Many things that were impossible have become possible," Maya said gently, reaching out with her telepathic abilities to offer comfort and healing energy. "We let us help you." The response came not in words, but in a wave of gratitude so powerful it nearly knocked Maya to her knees. As the restraints fell away, Kythera struggled to stand, her legs shaking from months of forced immobility. But with each passing moment, as Maya and Zephyros shared their strength with her through the growing telepathic link, she grew steadier. "There are others?" Kythera asked as they helped her from the compound, the pirates still trapped in their psychic paralysis. "At least a dozen more that we know of," Maya confirmed. "And we're going to find them all. We're going to give your people a chance to live again, to find new purpose in a universe that has changed beyond all recognition." As they escaped into the nebula's concealing mists, three minds touched where once there had been only loneliness and despair. The bond between Maya and Zephyros had grown to include Kythera, creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. For the first time since the war ended, the future began to look like something other than an endless series of endings. 6 months later, the mining station that had once been Zephyros's place of exile had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Where empty corridors had echoed with loneliness, now there was life, purpose, and the constant thrum of activity. 17 Vorthak mounts called the station home, each one rescued from isolation and despair, each one learning to form new bonds with human partners who had volunteered for the dangerous and experimental program. Maya stood on the observation deck where she had first met Zephyros, watching through the transparent aluminum as pairs of humans and Vorthak worked together in the station's expanded docking bays. The sight still filled her with wonder. Dr. Sarah Kim, a xenobiologist from the outer colonies, was bonded with Imon the Swift, working together to develop new propulsion systems that combined human engineering with Vorthak quantum manipulation. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a former military pilot who had lost his legs in the war, had found new purpose bonded with Velterra the Wise, their combined consciousness allowing them to navigate hyperspace routes that had previously been considered impossible. Each partnership was unique, shaped by the personalities and needs of both participants. Some focused on exploration and discovery, pushing into unknown regions of space to map new worlds and phenomena. Others worked on healing, using the combined knowledge of both species to develop medical techniques that could help survivors of the war on all sides. A few had even begun reaching out to former hegemony territories, establishing peaceful contact with other species that had been left adrift after the Empire's collapse. But it was the children that gave Maya the most hope. Human and Vorthak youngsters who had been born after the war, growing up together on the station, learning to form bonds from the earliest age. They played together in ways that would have been unthinkable just a year ago, their laughter echoing through halls that had once known only sorrow. These children would grow up in a universe where the deep connections between species were natural and expected rather than feared and forbidden. "You are troubled," Zephyros said, his presence gentle in her mind as he approached across the deck. His crystals now blazed with full health and vitality, and the pride in his bearing had been restored. But more than that, he had found something he had never known during his days as a cavalry mount. True partnership with a being who was his equal in all things. "Not troubled," Maya replied, leaning against his massive shoulder as she had learned to do during their long journey together. "Just overwhelmed, I suppose. A year ago, I was hiding my abilities and feeling sorry for myself. Now we're changing the galaxy." Kythera joined them, her own partner, Sarah, close behind. The human scientist had initially been skeptical of the bonding process, approaching it as purely a research opportunity. But the connection she had formed with the ancient warrior mount had transformed them both, creating a partnership that pushed the boundaries of what either species thought possible. "The Hegemony Council has agreed to meet," Kythera announced, her mental voice tinged with excitement and anxiety. "They want to discuss a formal alliance. After 3,000 years of conquest, they're finally ready to talk about cooperation instead." Maya felt a chill of apprehension. The remnants of the hegemony leadership had been watching their experiment with growing interest, but also with suspicion. Many still saw humans as the enemy, the upstart species that had shattered their empire and scattered their people. The fact that humans could bond with Vorthak mounts was seen by some as the ultimate insult, a theft of something sacred that belonged only to their species. They'll want to control it, Sarah said, voicing Maya's fears. Turn it into another weapon, another tool for domination. That's what they've always done. Some of them, yes, Zephyros agreed, but not all. The war changed many things, broke many old patterns of thinking, and they can see what we have accomplished here. Even the most stubborn among them must recognize that cooperation has yielded results that conquest never could. Through the vast network of bonds that now connected all the inhabitants of the station, Maya could feel the mixed emotions of her extended family. Hope and fear intertwined, excitement and caution feeding off each other in complex patterns. They had created something beautiful and powerful, but they all knew how fragile it still was. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, could shatter the peace they had built and send the galaxy spiraling back into conflict. There is something else, Kythera said, her mental voice careful and controlled. The human government has also requested a meeting. They want to discuss regulation of the bonding process. Maya's heart sank. She had been dreading this moment since their project had become too large to hide. The human colonial government was suspicious of anything that smacked of alien influence, especially anything that involved telepathic connections. There were politicians who saw their work as dangerous, even treasonous. They want to shut us down, Maya said flatly. Not shut down, Sarah corrected. Control. They want to turn the bonding process into a government program subject to military oversight and political approval. They're talking about background checks for potential partners, psychological evaluations, mandatory service periods, which would destroy everything we've built, Zephyros said, his mental voice heavy with anger and disappointment. The bonds cannot be forced or controlled. They must grow naturally from mutual trust and respect. What they propose would create soldiers, not partners. Maya closed her eyes and reached out through the network, feeling the pulse of 17 different minds linked in complex harmony. Each bond was unique, shaped by the specific needs and personalities of the partners involved. Some were strong and direct, like her connection with Zephyros. Others were subtle and nuanced, growing slowly over months of careful interaction. A few were still forming, tentative touches between minds that were learning to trust each other. But all of them were based on choice, on the free decision of both participants to open themselves to something larger than either could achieve alone. Government regulation would poison that trust, turning voluntary partnership into mandatory service. Then, we don't give them the choice, Maya said finally, opening her eyes to look at her companions. We show both sides that what we've built here is too valuable to destroy, too important to control. We demonstrate the full potential of human Vorthak cooperation. How do we do that? Sarah asked. Maya smiled, feeling Zephyros's approval flowing through their bond as he understood what she was planning. We invite them both here at the same time. Let them see what we've accomplished. Let them meet the children who are growing up with bonds they consider impossible. And then we show them what the future could look like if they choose cooperation over control. The negotiations that followed were the most complex and delicate in either species' history. Representatives from the human colonial government, the Hegemony Council, and several other alien species that had been liberated from the Empire all gathered at the mining station to witness what had been accomplished there. For some, it was the first time they had ever seen humans and Vorthak working as true equals. The sight of Maya riding through space on Zephyros's back, both of them sharing the same consciousness as they navigated through an asteroid field with impossible precision, challenged every assumption they had held about the nature of interspecies relationships. Dr. James Chun, Maya's adoptive father, was part of the human delegation. She had been nervous about seeing him again after so many months of unauthorized absence, but his reaction to what she had built was everything she could have hoped for. "I always knew you were special," he said, watching as she worked with Zephyros and three other bonded pairs to demonstrate a new form of faster-than-light communication that used quantum entangled consciousness. But this changes everything we thought we knew about the nature of intelligence and cooperation. The hegemony representatives were equally impressed, though they struggled more with the implications. For 3,000 years, their society had been built on the principle that some species were meant to rule while others served. The idea that true partnership was possible, that conquest was not the only way to achieve unity, challenged the foundations of their entire culture. But it was the children who ultimately won over both sides. Human and Vorthak youngsters who played together, learned together, and formed bonds with an ease that shamed their elders. When 8-year-old Tommy Martinez demonstrated his growing telepathic link with the young Vorthak Skyweaver, translating effortlessly between human speech and Vorthak quantum harmonics, even the most skeptical observers had to admit that something fundamentally new was emerging. The final agreement took weeks to negotiate, but when it was signed, it represented a new paradigm for galactic civilization. The bonding station would remain independent, neither under human nor hegemony control, but supported by both as a center for research and cultural exchange. Voluntary bonding programs would be established throughout human and former hegemony space, but always based on mutual choice rather than government mandate. Most importantly, the children born from these unions would be citizens of both species, bridges between worlds that had only recently learned to stop fighting each other. As the delegations departed and life on the station settled into its new normal, Maya found herself once again on the observation deck, where everything had begun. But this time, she was not alone in her contemplation. Zephyros was with her, as he always was now, their minds linked in permanent partnership. Hithra and Sarah were there too, along with several other bonded pairs and a handful of the station's children. Through the great windows, they could see ships departing for the far reaches of space, carrying the message of cooperation to worlds that had never known peace. Some carried human Vorthak teams to establish new research stations. Others headed for former hegemony worlds to offer aid and alliance rather than conquest. A few were bound for unknown regions of space, where bonded pairs would explore wonders that neither species could have discovered alone. What do you think the future will look like? Maya asked, not just of Zephyros, but of all the minds connected to theirs. The answer came not in words, but in images and emotions shared across the network. Children growing up bilingual in thought as well as speech. Cities where multiple species lived and worked as equals. Ships that sailed between stars, carrying crews bonded in ways that transcended the physical. A galaxy where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where the meeting of alien minds created new possibilities rather than new conflicts. Better, Zephyros said simply, his mental voice warm with certainty. It will be better than anything either of our species could have built alone. Maya smiled, feeling the truth of those words resonate through every bond in their growing network. They had started with nothing more than a broken warrior and a lonely girl, two beings who should have been enemies learning to become friends. From that simple beginning, they had built something that would reshape the galaxy. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation had begun. And in a universe where minds could touch across the barriers of species and culture, where understanding could bridge any gap, there was no limit to what they might accomplish together.